The village by the river. The village of Kaldar lay hidden deep within a vast forest, its life centered around the Silver River. The river's waters nurtured the land, feeding crops and sustaining the people, but it also held a dark secret. Legends spoke of a massive serpent dwelling beneath its currents, with emerald scales that shimmered under moonlight and eyes as red as burning coals. The serpent was both protector and tormentor, for it demanded a sacrifice every year on the night of the harvest moon. No one knew how or when the tradition began, but it had always been this way. The elders said the serpent kept the river flowing, ensuring a bountiful harvest. Without the offering, the water would run dry and the fields would wither, bringing ruin to Kaldar. Each year, a lottery was held, and one young person was chosen as the sacrifice, their name called from the ancient wooden box in the village square. They would be led to the riverbank and never seen again. It was a fate everyone feared, but also accepted, for there was no other choice. As the time for this year's lottery drew near, the village was thick with tension. The harvest moon was only days away, and every family whispered prayers that their loved ones would be spared. Among them was 17-year-old Mira, a girl with dark hair and eyes filled with quiet determination. She had seen too many friends taken by the river, their names called, their faces resigned to a fate they couldn't escape. But Mira was different. She was not ready to accept the same fate for herself or anyone else. Mira's father, a man worn by years of hard work, tried to prepare her. "If your name is chosen," he said softly, "you must go. It is for the good of the village." His voice was steady, but Mira saw the fear in his eyes, and it stirred something rebellious within her. She refused to believe that this was the only way. As the day of the lottery approached, she felt the weight of the village's tradition pressing down on her. But instead of fear, she found herself filled with a defiant resolve. Mira didn't know how, but she was determined to find a way to break the cycle of sacrifices. She was tired of seeing her friends disappear, and she was tired of living under the shadow of the serpent's demands. The lottery. The day of the lottery arrived, casting a tense silence over the village square. The sky was gray, and the air felt heavy, as if even the heavens mourned what was to come. Villagers gathered in somber clusters, their faces pale and eyes downcast. At the center of the square stood the elders, surrounding an ancient wooden box filled with slips of paper, each bearing the name of an eligible youth. For generations, this ritual had been performed without fail, and today would be no different. Mira stood on the outskirts of the crowd, her heart pounding. Her father had tried to comfort her that morning, placing a firm hand on her shoulder. "If your name is called, you must go," he said, his voice cracking slightly. "The serpent's wrath is not something we can afford." Mira had nodded, but inside she felt only defiance. She was tired of living in fear, tired of seeing her friends vanish into the dark waters of the river, never to return. Today, she was ready to fight back, even if she had to do it alone. The head elder, Leora, stepped forward, her frail hands reaching into the box. She drew out a slip of paper and unfolded it with deliberate slowness, as if savoring the moment. "Mira," she announced, her voice echoing through the square. Gasps rippled through the crowd, and every eye turned to Mira, who stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she had just heard. For a moment, the world seemed to stand still. Mira could feel her father's gaze on her, pleading for her to accept her fate, but she couldn't. Something inside her snapped. "No," she said, her voice barely more than a whisper. Then louder, "No, I won't go." A shocked silence fell over the square. No one had ever refused the lottery before. Leora's eyes, sharp despite her age, fixed on Mira with a mix of anger and surprise. "You do not have a choice," she said coldly. "The serpent must be appeased, or the river will dry, and we will all suffer." Mira stepped forward, her legs shaking, but her voice steady. "What if there was another way? What if we could end this, once and for all?" The villagers stared at her, some with curiosity, others with fear. No one dared to speak up, and Mira realized how alone she was. Still, she didn't back down. She was determined to find a way to break the cycle, even if it meant defying everything the village believed in. Descent into the depths. The night of the harvest moon arrived, its pale light casting eerie shadows across the village. Despite her defiance, Mira found herself at the riverbank, her hands bound tightly in front of her. The elders had made their decision. She would be the sacrifice. whether she accepted it or not. The villagers gathered silently, their faces ghostly in the moonlight, their eyes filled with a mix of fear and resignation. But Mira had a plan, a desperate one she had not shared with anyone. She had spent the past few days scouring old stories and forgotten legends, searching for anything that might offer a way to break the serpent's hold over the village. She learned of a hidden cave beneath the river, a place where the serpent was said to dwell. If she could find it, maybe she could confront the creature or even kill it. It was a slim hope, but it was all she had. As she stood at the edge of the river, the cold water lapping at her feet, Mira felt a surge of determination. She looked over her shoulder at the villagers, catching her father's gaze. His eyes glistened with unshed tears, but he didn't say a word. Mira gave him a small, defiant nod, then turned and waded deeper into the water, letting it pull her under. Beneath the surface, the world was dark and silent, the murky water enveloping her like a shroud. She struggled against the ropes that bound her, her lungs burning as she fought to hold her breath. Just as she felt herself slipping into unconsciousness, she felt a sudden tug, pulling her deeper. The rope snapped and she was free, drifting down into the dark depths. As she sank, Mira saw something massive moving in the water, its shape barely visible in the shadows. It was the serpent. Its emerald scales shimmered faintly, reflecting the moonlight that filtered through the water. The creature circled her slowly, its eyes glowing like embers, studying her. But instead of attacking, it simply watched, as if waiting for her to make the first move. Mira's heart pounded, but she forced herself to swim closer, her fear giving way to determination. She reached out and touched the serpent's scales, and the world around her seemed to shift. The water grew warmer, and suddenly she was no longer in the river, but in a dark, echoing chamber deep beneath it. The serpent coiled before her, its eyes fixed on hers, and she knew this was her only chance. The bargain Mira stood in a vast, echoing chamber beneath the river, her clothes soaked, her breath ragged. The serpent loomed before her, coiled and still, its eyes glowing like molten embers in the dark. "Why have you come?" it hissed, its voice a deep, rumbling echo. "You were meant to be an offering, yet here you stand, unbroken and defiant." Mira's pulse raced, but she fought to steady her voice. "I've come to end this," she said, her words firm. "To stop the sacrifices and free my village. If my life is what you want, take it, but let it be the last." The serpent's eyes narrowed, a hint of amusement flickering in their depths. "Do you think you can bargain with me?" it asked, its voice dripping with disdain. "Many have tried, all have failed. What makes you any different?" For a moment, fear threatened to swallow her, but she refused to let it. She had come too far to back down. "Then kill me," she said, taking a step closer. "But I won't die in silence. I want to know why you demand these sacrifices. What curse binds you to the river?" The serpent was silent, its massive form shifting slightly as it considered her words. When it spoke again, its tone was softer, almost sad. "Long ago, the villagers angered the spirits of this land," it said. "In their desperation to survive, they broke a sacred pact. I was bound to this river to guard its waters, to ensure it flowed, but only at a cost, a price paid in blood, year after year." Mira's heart ached as she listened. She had never imagined the serpent's demands were tied to a curse, a bond forged long before she was born. "Then let us find another way," she said, her voice pleading. "I'm willing to do whatever it takes. Just tell me how we can end this." The serpent's gaze pierced through her, as if searching for something. "There is a way," it said slowly, "but it requires a new bond, one not forged from fear but from duty and trust. If you are willing, you shall become the guardian of this river. You will ensure its flow, and in return, there will be no more sacrifices. But if ever the village forgets this pact, the river will dry and all will suffer." Mira felt a wave of relief, tempered by the weight of what the serpent was asking. She nodded, knowing there was no other choice. "I accept," she said. The serpent coiled around her, and for a moment, she felt warmth, as if bathed in sunlight. Then, just as suddenly, she was back on the riverbank, the villagers staring in shock. The ropes that had bound her were gone, and the serpent had vanished, leaving the river flowing clearer than ever. Mira stood tall, knowing that while she had saved her village from the annual fear of sacrifice, her life was now entwined with the river's fate. She was no longer just a villager. She was its guardian, bound to protect it not by force, but by choice.